the anti-vaxxers. They are putting at risk their own kids, and they're putting at risk our kids as well. And those people are putting us all at risk. Aaron O'Toole is siding with them instead of with Canadians who did their part and stepped up. Canadians have shown it in being there for each other. And I am not going to back down no matter how many of them show up to try and shout us down. So shame on you, Aaron O'Toole. You need to condemn those people. And that means we're going to work on vaccination certifications, on vaccination passports.
And that we work with the provinces on vaccine certifications.
If you want to get on a plane or a train in the coming months, you're going to have to be fully vaccinated. Now is the time for people who are still resistant to getting vaccinated, that there will be consequences for those people in not being able to go to a gym or a restaurant, not being able to go to a movie theater, not being able to get on a train or a plane.
Our plans to make sure that anyone on a plane or train is vaccinated, that anyone in the Federal Public Service gets vaccinated.
And we know that the way to get through this as well is to make sure that people can go into non-essential businesses and feel safe that they're not going to get catch COVID from someone next to them.
We all have an opportunity to get back a little more to normal. Except that those people who have not yet chosen to get vaccinated are putting all this at risk.
The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people?
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame!
Le refus de tempérer à cet ordre vous rend passible d'une amende pouvant aller de 1 000 à 6 000 $.
Not only are they putting at risk our kids who are still too young to get vaccinated. I have a 7-year-old who started in grade 2 just earlier this week. Very excited about it, but he's vulnerable. All of us, even if we did the right things and got vaccinated, are at risk of lockdowns because of future waves of unvaccinated.
Having us risk more lockdowns because they haven't chosen to get vaccinated yet.
Please, everyone, if we can be respectful and we can leave.
Piece of shit! Transphobic piece of shit! Transphobic piece of shit! Transphobic, where we draw the line. This is where.
In September, the federal government posted a call for expressions of interest for contractors to supply, provide, and manage quarantine isolation camps throughout every province and every territory in Canada. These quarantine isolation camps, however, are not limited to people with COVID, but provide a wide latitude for many people to be detained. Surely this government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built? And how many people does this government expect to detain?
My son is supposed to be coming in from the flight from Phoenix, and he is being detained because they didn't accept his test. They're saying it's not accurate, and they are wanting to take him to a quarantine facility. They won't let me talk to him. They won't let me see him. They won't come and talk to me. The board, they say he doesn't have a choice. They say that it's the law. They say that I don't have the right to talk to him, to see him. and they are taking him against my will and his will, and I'm not okay with it, and I don't know what to do about it, and I don't know where I'm supposed to find him. So this quarantine facility apparently is up and running and totally legal, as they say, and I'm freaking out.
Today, we're confirming an additional $23.7 million in federal funding to operate isolation sites in regions such as Toronto, Peel, York, and Durham. And we're finalizing the details for similar sites in Thunder Bay, Windsor, and other regions.
Quebec is planning to force adults that refuse a COVID vaccine to pay what's called a health contribution tax.
Those who refuse to receive their first dose in the coming weeks will have to pay a new health contribution.
We will be putting forward measures to put those tools permanently in place. The authorities of FinTrack, I believe, do need to be expanded to cover crowdsourcing platforms and payment platform and their payment providers.
Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination. Qui sont extrémistes. Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là?
So we need to rethink our notion of what terrorism is these days. Is that the point?
Well, I think be more expansive in our definition. I really see two mainstreams, and one is an emphasis on nationalism, also tied in with a anti-statist or anti-authoritarian perception.
And why would we call it right-wing extremism?
You know, that traditional left-right ideological spectrum, liberalism, conservatism.
A new report that really is a warning about rising online activity by right-wing extremists in Canada.
In Canada, we found that right-wing extremists were more active in 2020 than they were in 2019. The accounts belonging to right-wing extremists were more prevalent and more accessible.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government's COVID restrictions were a frequent target of those attacks.
Well, I absolutely do think that white supremacist movements are a very real, a very grave threat to Western liberal democracy. I think they are a grave and real threat here in Canada.
The next terrorist killer in Canada is known. We can build the profile. It's a guy. He's white. And he's probably said some shit. He's probably made you feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of his comments. He might have a thing for military paraphernalia or firearms. And we need to snitch on these guys.
You want my life, Jesse Brown? You come and take it. Don't send the millennials after me on your little witch hunt.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are...
That's why I went to Ottawa. 9 out of 10 stages for genocide present in Canada right now. And apparently, the target of this little witch hunt, the profile of the next terrorist killer in Canada, is just about everybody I know who's ever bled for this country. Are you going to tell me that we weren't met with hatred?
That's a wounded veteran! That's a wounded warrior right there! That's Hey, you don't have to hit him like that. Please.
Are you going to tell me that those cops didn't hate us?
Man being kneed there. It's terrible.
Oh, come on through. Come on through. What is happening here? Wow. What is this lady doing? Trampling. Trampling horses. Trampling. Stop it. Stop it. What? Oh my God.
And that profile of the next terrorist killer? You're going to tell me that's by accident? I'm not so sure.
Oh, look at that. I guess I better turn my microphone on before I start talking. So yeah, my name is Jeff Evely. I'm the Ops Sgt-Maj for Veterans for Freedom, back with you now on the 6th of January, 2023. It's Friday, folks, and as usual, it's been a heck of a week. So I think we're just going to round things out this week with a quick presentation on where we are with a few issues we've been tracking throughout the week. I'm glad to see a few folks are on here. Some of my regulars are saying good morning, so I'm hoping that we got enough morning people around here to keep this this trend going. And yeah, okay. So without further ado, I think I'll just give you guys the quick and dirty here. All right, so here's our philosophical meme for the day. This is Carl Jung. He was a Swiss philosopher and psychologist. He developed his own theory of mind that I think kind of went a lot further than what a lot of Freud did. And he's pretty well known for going back over pretty much all of human literature and extrapolating several dozen archetypes of the kinds of characters that we represent. It's about 3 dozen or so. And later we had Bill Strauss come in with Neil Howe, the two co-authors of Strauss-Howe Generational Theory, which I'm always plugging on this program because we are in a fourth turning, as they predicted in 1990. That would hit us in the year 2020, plus or minus 2 years. And so anyway, this is a pretty neat connection to that because it was Bill Howe who realized that there weren't several dozen archetypes because, for example, the child is portrayed differently in different eras. Sometimes they're little devils and other times they're pure and civic minded. So what in fact Jung had done was observed 4 different archetypes, the 4 generational archetypes of Strauss-Howe generational theory at different stages of their lives. And the child archetype that he had used was actually the hero archetype in its childhood, if I'm not mistaken. So that's interesting. And Carl Jung, brilliant guy, says every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. So again, this ties in well with the Strauss-Howe generational theory that I'm always talking about, because idealism is the character that basically marks the prophet generational archetype, which at this moment in our history is represented as the boomer generation. And ultimately, idealism is not the kind of quality that you want in a senior leader. I think you need stoicism, cynicism, that kind of thing. That's what's going to lead to effective leadership, especially during a crisis. But with all the idealism that we've seen, especially with respect to our ability to produce novel vaccination technology on the spot in response to a crisis, I think we took a little too idealistic of a view on that. And I see some people are already commenting on what's going to be our first subject for today. So this is the Daily Beast, and they're reporting why veterans are lining up for legalized magic mushrooms. Now, this is from December 31st, so I'm just coming across it now. It's a few days ago now, and I got to give a shout out to Tom Quiggin for putting this item in the Veterans for Freedom sit rep there. Sometimes I pull some stuff from Tom's sit rep and try to credit him whenever I'm doing that, because he's doing some great work over there. Okay, and the subtitle here is, in January, Oregon will be the first state to offer controlled use of magic mushrooms. Veterans forced overseas for psilocybin therapy say they will be among the first in line. Yeah, I'd like to start lining up for that if I can get Veterans Affairs to pay for some of the therapy that I'm getting right now. As a matter of fact, it's just a little bit of powder that I throw into my coffee in the morning, and it's got some flavors in there like cinnamon and other stuff. It's pretty great stuff. It's called what is it called? I can't remember now. I'll think of it anyway, but it's just a product that's available on the market. And I have found that it helps quite a bit. And there are other veterans in V4F. We've talked about this on podcasts before with Mike Rood. Mike is a pretty strong advocate for this kind of therapy for, PTSD, whether it's PTSD or quinism, even anxiety. I think it can be very helpful in that regard. Okay, so here's the article. I don't think we're going to do the whole thing. It's actually a bit long and a little emotive, if you ask me. Okay, so in 1995, Amanda joined the U.S. Air Force when at the height of her confidence. Originally a shy kid from Central Oregon, she spent most of her adolescence building up her self-esteem, performing in pageants and high school theater, choir, and debate. I'm getting an awful lot of notifications from something. Okay. At 20 years old, she marched into her local recruitment office to enlist in the military, ready to travel the world and build self-discipline. By the time her service was over in 2000, her confidence had, quote, unraveled, close quote, as she describes it. Amanda, whose last name is being withheld to protect her privacy, was sexually assaulted by a fellow military member in a year into her enlistment. Her mental health suffered after years of tumultuous relationships with other service members. She was honorably discharged, close to 4 months pregnant, with severe symptoms of undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. That sounds like a harrowing experience. When did she get in? It says at 20 years old, 95. She joined in 95, decade of darkness. Yeah, there was a lot of nastiness going on back then. Okay. So after taking a class on psychedelic therapy, she became interested in trying psilocybin, the hallucinogenic substance derived from magic mushrooms, to try rooting out some of the more deeply embedded trauma. Quote, I really believe that psilocybin therapy can reconnect or even change those neural pathways because I need a reset, close quote. Amanda said in an interview with the Daily Beast, quote, I've done all the hard work, but I don't know how to fix that part. I really need to, close quote. Yeah, and I found that it just kind of, the only thing that I really noticed is it's like, wow, I'm actually in a good mood. But there's no hallucinations or anything. If anybody out there is thinking that sort of thing, no, you need high dosages for that kind of thing. And they're talking about microdosing here. So it's just, like I said, a little spoonful of something you put in your coffee and you're good to go. Amanda will soon get her chance in January. Oregon will become the first state to offer controlled use of magic mushrooms, thanks to Measure 109, which voters passed in 2020 and allows for the legal manufacture, delivery, and administration of psilocybin in licensed facilities. The state will begin processing licenses in January, and organizations to connect veterans to psychedelics will be watching the rollout closely. Hopefully, the Beaver State will come to future psilocybin retreats, where new cohorts of facilitators can be trained and where many of those trained facilitators are likely to be veterans themselves. Sign me up. The Heroic Hearts program currently offers ayahuasca retreats in Mexico and Peru to veterans with a history of military combat and or sexual assault. Founder Jesse Gould says he hopes to set up an outpost in Oregon within the next year. An Army veteran who credits ayahuasca for helping him heal from PTSD, Gould envisions a pilot program where veterans are treated with magic mushrooms in a group therapy setting led by veterans who have done their own healing through psychedelics. So that all sounds really interesting to me. I'm familiar with ayahuasca. I've never tried it. I understand that there's a lot of different retreats that you can go to down south there, Mexico and beyond. Peru, I think they mentioned here, Mexico and Peru, and you can get together with a shaman, and it's kind of like a peyote or something, it's a natural hallucinogen, and you can go with a shaman on a guided trip, and apparently it's quite profound, but I've only ever read about it, so this is interesting stuff. Okay. So, quote, we're trying to create the self-supporting ecosystem to keep costs down, make it scalable, and take the burden off of therapists, close quote, Gould said. Quote, the veterans can help support their brothers and sisters who they relate to. It's training communities to heal themselves, close quote. Yeah, it really has to come from the veterans because let's just say the folks going up ahead of us there, they don't get it. Okay. The Synaptic Institute, an organization that trains new psychedelic facilitators, recently announced plans to earmark scholarship funds for veterans entering the training program, which can cost upwards of $8,000. Veterans of War, a program that offers fellowship to service members for psychedelic retreats in Peru and Costa Rica, intends to train veterans as facilitators at a future service site in Oregon. The Mission Within, which runs psychedelic retreats in Mexico for special operations veterans, also plans to establish a training program in Oregon for service members. Quote, a lot of people, when they go through a retreat and experience healing through psychedelics, they want to give back and they want to get involved, close quote, said TMW founder Dr. Martin Polenko. Yeah, we're seeing that a lot, I think, in the veteran community, the peer support networks and stuff like that. And I've had the experience of going into a therapist's office and I see all the books with PTSD and the title and stuff like that. And it's a nice fancy place in downtown Ottawa. And I'm like, wow, this is a real money racket, huh? And you're just some middle class, upper class, or really, yeah, upper class, highly educated kind of white collar female, and I don't really relate to you very much, so I'm not sure why you're in this, but it's probably not because there's any kind of a kinship or sympathy for veterans there. It's got more to do with the market that's been made available through the Afghanistan war and the kind of rampant abuse of power that we see throughout the military these days. Okay, so though there are numerous studies proving the efficacy of psilocybin when treating symptoms of depression, addiction, and PTSD, the Food and Drug Administration still classifies psilocybin as a Schedule I drug of no known medical value. Schedule I is also like crack and stuff like this. This was the problem they had for years with weed. Was it was still classified as a Schedule I, which is like all the worst drugs you can imagine, all the hardest core kind of drugs you can imagine. So Oregon and Colorado both legalized controlled use of psilocybin, with Colorado's program scheduled to roll out in 2024. Other cities such as San Francisco and Washington, D.C. have passed ballot measures to decriminalize the drug. Veterans looking to try magic mushrooms without breaking U.S. law must travel to either Latin America or the Caribbean to find a retreat. Armand Lecomonte, a Marine Corps veteran who claims psychedelic-assisted treatment saved his life, helps orchestrate psilocybin retreats in Jamaica several times a year for myco-meditations. A Portland resident, Lecomonte urged state and local leaders to legalize the therapeutics use of psilocybin. He said plans to get trained and licensed facilitator. He said he plans to get trained as a licensed facilitator in Oregon. Quote, it's ridiculous these veterans have to leave the country they served to get the healing they need. Close quote. I agree. To date, 30 men in Lecomonte's battalion have died by suicide. Quote, if some of my brethren had access to this, they'd still be here. Close quote. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, they want to keep us on the antidepressants from Big Pharma. When there are perfectly natural solutions that are more cost effective out there. The only thing is that we got to go out of pocket to pay for them. And nobody's getting rich off it, right? That's the thing, is these are a lot of startups and things like this. So the big pharma, big investment class, the boomer investment class, they're not the ones that are going to be making money off of this. So don't expect it. Don't be holding your breath for any kind of forthcoming approvals. So despite 56% of Oregonians voting in favor of the Measure 109 in 2020, a majority of counties voted for this in November to opt out of its implementation. Back in July, while commissioners in rural Deschutes County, Deschutes County considered adding a ban on legal psilocybin to the ballot, retired Navy SEAL Chad Kuski urged local leaders to consider veterans. The 12 combat deployments and years of suffering from PTSD, depression, and anxiety, Kusi sought psilocybin therapy in Mexico. Quote, it radically changed my life, close quote. He said at the meeting, quote, if you're a veteran struggling with traumatic brain injury or PTSD, going to a foreign country can be a monumentally terrifying thing to do, close quote. Kuski told county commissioners, quote, especially when you're going to embark on a healing journey, close quote. Once voters passed Measure 109, Rose Moulin-Franco moved to Ashland, Oregon to pursue her dream of opening a wellness center where she hopes to offer psilocybin treatment in addition to flotation tank therapy, sound baths, group meditation, and other forms of treatment. A military veteran who served during the Vietnam era, she began exploring the use of psychedelics following the death of her husband, who suffered from, quote, horrendous PTSD, quote, after 3 tours in Vietnam, as one would, I can well imagine. Yeah, I've done the flotation tank therapy as well. That's really cool. And I'll give a shout out to Joe Rogan. I know I kind of started getting hip to the psilocybin therapy and the psychedelic therapy and stuff like that through Eddie Bravo initially, who's Joe's he's his jiu-jitsu coach. And I was, when I was back and I was trained in mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu and all that fun stuff, I was pretty big on Eddie Bravo back in the day. I had all his books and stuff like that. And Joe talks about this kind of thing too, but I think it's mostly kind of coming from Eddie. He's kind of way out there, but Joe has the funds to go on these adventures. So yeah, the flotation therapy is pretty cool. It's just like sensory deprivation. You're floating, you're not laying on anything. There's a feeling of weightlessness, of you can kind of forget that you have a body for a little while there. And it's a pretty, again, it's a bit of a profound experience that's hand in hand with a lot of meditation practices. But yeah, these are really interesting. I think more, they're less harsh, they're less invasive ways to methods of intervention, I think, into a lot of these mental health scenarios that might become deadly. Moulin-Franco found hallucinogens helpful in letting go of past trauma. She, like Amanda Medford, was living with the trauma of being sexually assaulted in the military. Almost 1 in 4 women in the military face sexual assault while in the service, according to the New York Times analysis. So that's New York Times. 1 in 4. You have to be careful with words. Now, sexual assault, that's a real word that has a definition in the Canadian legal criminal code anyway. And but a lot of times we're talking about sexual misconduct in the military, and so that could be just a crass request for a date, that kind of thing that gets lumped into these broader definitions that we're going with in the 21st century. Whereas, back in the 90s and the 80s, they were talking about actual sexual assaults, not just clumsy requests for dates from service members. But I digress. I just want to make sure that that's clear. Like the standard that they're holding the current generation of troops to is much higher than it was back in the 80s and 90s. I'll say that. So after her husband's death, Moulin-Franco became a trauma specialist. Until recently, she'd been eyeing a tract of remote land in Jackson County as a potential wellness center site, but the county commissioners voted to restrict psilocybin service centers for rural parts of the county and put the kibosh on the plan. Moulin-Franco is frustrated, but is determined to build a service center wherever she's allowed. Describing herself as a traditional veteran air woman, Amanda says she hopes to one day be able to legally try psilocybin in a safe clinical setting. She doesn't think she'll feel comfortable finding magic mushrooms on the black market, Amanda said, and the idea of traveling outside the country for the treatment is a no-go. Quote, I didn't do drugs growing up. I don't like doing stuff that's illegal, close quote, Amanda said. She said she wants to try magic mushrooms with a trained, credentialed facilitator she knows and trusts. Quote, I want to do it in a way that is clinically appropriate and evidence-based. Otherwise, I won't have much belief in it. I'm more open-minded than that. I hope that maybe some other folks out there are too. Do a little bit of research on your own. And that's when they start saying, I need a clinician to tell me what to do and stuff like that. I've always been a little bit skeptical of the clinicians, actually. I can remember being pretty just fresh in the military for all intents and purposes, only maybe a year or two in or something, and I was right there on the leading edge of a lot of the low carb stuff that was really kind of coming out back then. And every time I went to talk to the so-called medical officers or so-called doctors at the so-called clinic on base, they would start telling me, oh no, you got to stop eating all those eggs. You're going to have high cholesterol and have a heart attack. And you got to eat 12 servings of bread a day if you want to be healthy. And I was like, nah, I think that's a little bit of the grain lobby, maybe getting their way, exerting influence over the so-called science, because it's all government stuff. But they never saw it that way. They're always like, oh, these are doctors, these are specialists and highly credentialed people. And I'm like, yeah, and they work for the government, and the government is lobbied by big grain, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, a little bit of a short sidebar there, rant over. Yeah, this is very promising. I think I'm pretty excited to see all the buzz around this now. So the other thing here I saw trending on Twitter this morning, there are a few different interesting trends. As a Canadian seems to be popping up quite a bit. So if you go and you search there, you'll see like people are putting this in their tweets. It's not like a hashtag, but it just seems to be that a lot of people are out there saying as a Canadian and then stating their position. Now that's never a valid argument. It's never a valid argument to say, as a man or as a woman or as a gay man or any of that stuff. As a doctor, I don't, none of that really matters. That doesn't make the point valid. It's really a question of whether you've got, minor or major premise, minor presence, and conclusion all sorted out with sufficient evidence and logic and so on and so forth. Doesn't matter who you are. Anyway, it says, check out the most ignorant as a Canadian tweet. So it is a lot of kind of these lefty lunatic, useful idiots that are out there using that as a Canadian to represent the most egregious, ignorant sort of communist propaganda lines going. So, but I thought I'd show a couple from the other side. So this is Real Crisco, and he says, these people love their favorite liberal racist who has multiple ethics violations while sending the most Canadians in history to local food banks as a result of liberals' inflationary economic policies. The face of racism. And there we have our cuttlefish crime minister. You ladies know what a cuttlefish is, right? That's in nature, that's the fish, the beta males of which will adopt an alternate mating strategy of forcing copulation that involves mimicking the patterns of female behavior to make those females feel safe and draw them in close, and so he can grab a piece. And in the human population, that particular beta male is known as a male feminist. Okay, so this is the other kind of as a Canadian that I thought was now I don't think this is the same guy I initially saw saying as a Canadian, but is it? Yeah, okay. So the first appearance of a Canadian delivered armored combat support vehicle, the ACFV LAV APC in Ukraine. So an APC is an armored personnel carrier, armored combat support vehicle, whatever you want to call it. This was the one, I think, this was the one that, this is the LAVs. These are the LAVs that we sent to Saudi Arabia, and the media was like, hey, what are we doing sending tanks to Saudi Arabia? And the Trudeau regime said, oh, they're not tanks, they're Jeeps. So these are the Jeeps that we sent to Saudi Arabia. That's a hell of a lot more than the Jeeps that they sent Gen Xers and young millennials into Afghanistan with. And they told us to, not me personally, but telling people to put their frag vests on the floor of the Iltis Jeep so they don't get blown up by those IEDs that will actually throw one of these things 80 to 100 feet in the air, in the case of my V4F brother, Chris Deering. Combat wounded Chris Deering, sorry. So 39 of these modern vehicles were promised by Canada at the end of June, but only began arriving recently. So these are our armored vehicles that we paid for. I'm always asking, like, how many Gen Xers and millennials, how many people had to die in the Iltis Jeep just to get the boomers to pony up the dough to buy these light armored vehicles that we needed to mitigate our risk from IED attacks in Afghanistan? I'm not sure what that number actually is, but it was too many. They never should have sent us in those Iltis Jeeps to begin with. Of course, it was all politics and a lot of dog and pony show type stuff. But this is what those things really look like. So that's our equipment over there in Ukraine. And I think I pulled up the wrong guy here, but I saw somebody saying, as a Canadian, I'm really glad to see that my tax dollars are going toward poking that Russian bear and escalating all the time. So that's something to watch. And here's another one here. This is at Real Pure Love. And they're saying, as a Canadian, I'm very glad to see that 77% of my fellow Canadians have finally realized, or knew the whole time, that the, quote, vaccination, close quote, propaganda is BS. So, yeah, here's the meme here. It's Died Suddenly News, the deleted Facebook group. Canadian University ends vaccine mandate after 2 students, Spencer Cornelis and Mega Thakur, died unexpectedly, both vaccinated. There you go. So, yeah, this is what's really waking people up is, like I keep saying, I mean, we showed the stats here for Canada on this program earlier this week, I think. And the bottom line up front is always all-cause mortality. That's the signal that we're looking through, or that we're looking for through all the statistical noise. You filter all the noise. The signal that you're left with is all-cause mortality. That's the bottom line. Is more people died after the vaccine rollout than died before. The death rate went up. Not with SARS-CoV-2. It only went up about 5.6, 5.8% with that. And prior to the end of 2021, you had to meet that 15% in excess of a normal year for all-cause mortality just for it to be considered a pandemic. But now they got rid of that criterion. So anyway, the death rate is going up, and they're still trying to push this stuff into the 6-month-olds. So, but it's nice to see so many people are waking up on this, and they actually, you see, I like these guys. I like to see the tweets when they provide links and stuff like that. So here's what they linked to for that meme, and it says COVID-19 vaccination in Canada, and so this is just a page. A quick kind of dashboard to give us some statistics. So key updates, at least 1 dose, total population is 83.3, 5 years and older, 87%. Now Denmark banned vaccination, the mRNA vaccine for people under 18. So you got to wonder what the heck's going on in Canada here. 0 to 4 years, 8.4%. Are you kidding me? There's no risk, and there's no risk of dying of SARS-CoV-2 and all kinds of risk, an unknown level of risk associated with that mRNA therapy. So, so the primary series completed, total population 80%, 5 years and older 84.4%, 0 to 4 is 3.5%. And primary series completed, you can see in the note down here, it says the portion of people who completed the primary series excludes Quebec, except for the 0 to 4 years population due to changes in Quebec's vaccination status categories. So they're making it harder and harder to gather valid statistics these days, aren't they? So in the last 6 months, primary series completed or booster dose received, total population 22.9%, 5 years and older, 23.9%. So that's in the last 6 months. And the booster dose received since August 1st, 2022, total population 19.8, 5 years and older, 20.8. So that's a big drop. That's basically everything's been quartered since the primary series. So the primary series completed, I think they mean maybe that first booster too. I would have to kind of dive into some of the definitions here. Oh, and here's a nice map. So Canada, 83.3%. And you can see the darker it gets, the darker green is 90% or higher. And what do we see here? We see a lot of, okay, here's Newfoundland, lunatic lefty Labrador, Newfoundland of Antifa harassing James Topp while he's on his way through there. And I remember there was the meme going back and forth after the last election where, there were 2 guys like just giving each other the finger in the middle of the street. And it's quite hilarious to watch them kind of walk away and come back just to give each other the finger again. And one guy was labeled as Alberta and the other guy was labeled as Newfoundland. So that's the kind of division that we've seen in the country under this regime between East and West. And we see this probably follows a lot of that lefty liberal lunaticism, because we can see that BC, they're pretty out there, bunch of tree huggers or whatever. So they're pretty in the tank with 86%, 95.8 in Newfoundland and Labrador. I think didn't they kill enough guys over there with the Beaumont Hamel that time? They're already kind of running low on men in Labrador, or in Newfoundland and Labrador, and yeah, this is not good. So, what do we see? Alberta, 79.5, 81.3 in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, maybe not as conservative right-leaning as them, but 82.3. So this basically follows, your leanings on the political spectrum. And that's, I would say, an indication that your vaccine status, again, is just a showing of fealty to the regime, highly political, but I think ultimately cultist. It's like a blood sacrifice you got to give to this theocracy in order to be considered spiritually pure. And we got Jordan Peterson. He's still trending out there. I was showing a little bit about this before, and Peterson is under attack from the College of Physicians. They want him to attend a re-education camp so that he understands what he's allowed to say and what he's not allowed to say online, while calling himself a psychologist. So they're going to strip him of his title as a psychologist, not because that he has complaints coming from anybody who's been in his practice. They have a bunch of complaints against him, but they haven't been able to trace that to anybody that he's ever really treated in his capacity as a psychologist. It's all political, and it's the woke mobsters that are coming for him for blaspheming the one true dogma of wokeness. So the call to action here is we stand with Dr. Jordan Peterson. Defend free speech in Canada, Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. So that's next Wednesday, 12 p.m. College of Psychologists, 110, Eglinton Avenue, Toronto, Ontario. So there you go, folks. If you're in Ontario, I would say this is something you might want to make your way down to here. This is a protest at the College of Psychologists, 12 p.m. Next Wednesday on January 11th, 2023. And also, here's something you want to check out. This is a petition that's started by the Counter Signal. That's, Mike Campbell seems to be the one writing about it, but Counter Signal is Keean Bexte's kind of baby, and he's a Rebel alumnus. He was with them for a little while before moving on, for quite a while, actually. And he's been manhandled by Trudeau's goons on more than one occasion because he's pretty persistent. But anyway, here's the article. Again, this is Mike Campbell, January 3rd, 2023. Jordan Peterson has revealed that the College of Psychologists of Ontario threatened to revoke his license unless he stops bashing Prime Minister Trudeau. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Straight to the point. Quote, breaking, the Ontario College of Psychologists has demanded that I submit myself to mandatory social media communication retraining with their experts for, among other crimes, retweeting at Pierre Poilievre and criticizing at Justin Trudeau and his political allies, close quote, Peterson tweeted. So we talked about that, I think, yesterday. That was the tweet that he put out. He further stated that the CP Ontario informed him, College of Physicians Ontario, informed him of a dozen complaints about him from people all over the world. Complaints pertain to what he's saying on Twitter and what he has said on Joe Rogan's podcast. Peterson says none of the complaints came from any of his past or present patients or from any of their acquaintances. Quote, I am to take a course of such training with reports documenting my progress or face an in-person tribunal and suspension of my right to operate as a licensed clinical psychologist, he said. I think there's an open bracket with no close bracket there, guys. It looks like a typo. Quote, we are now in a situation in Canada under Justin Trudeau where practicing professionals can have their livelihoods and public reputations threatened in a very serious manner for agreeing with the official opposition and criticizing major government figures, close quote. Peterson has been outspoken regarding Trudeau after the Freedom Convoy protest was trampled out by Trudeau. Peterson called him a stage actor and a narcissist. In November, Peterson released a video attacking politicians and pundits who push globalist environmental agendas that will increase disease and starvation for millions. Peterson said, quote, woke moralizers of the environmental close quote, globalist movement have caused the European energy crisis. He said that Putin is being used as a scapegoat to absolve politicians from responsibility. Yeah, and that's exactly it, I think. They are kind of just blaming the other side, no matter what it is. If it's Putin on the other side, then it's his fault, and it's just whatever the issue happens to be. Like those of us who don't want to see our children turned into pharmacological livestock by the corporate interests working in tandem with our politicians. Specifically through, the sterilization and sexual mutilation of our children, and also through the mass gene therapy that's taking place. That I saw a couple of studies, at least one coming out of Europe now, that's already starting to say that the initial indications are that there is there may be a lasting impact to the human genome. So that's what they do, though, is they just vilify anybody who criticizes them, and so. All of these issues are basically beyond the reach of rational discourse whenever you're engaged with the other side. Okay, back to the article. Quote, the mentality among the eco-extremists is as follows. If we have to doom the poor to destroy the system that made the rich, so be it. You just can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, close quote. And that is the kind of postmodernist, i.e. culturally Marxist view that the modern environmentalist movement has taken on. And I've spoken before about some of the early not the early, but the environmental movement was basically co-opted during the 70s-ish by the boomer generation coming into it and taking the culturally Marxist view that, that human beings are essentially the oppressive class and that nature is essentially the oppressed class, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, in the words of Marxism. And so they've turned misogynistic. They're sort of, as in anti-human, misogynistic. And so they tend to rail against any human activity that leads to our prosperity because it blasphemes their Gaian goddess of nature. And really, nature is not necessarily good or bad. It just is, right? To say that nature is good is to commit the naturalistic logical fallacy. Okay, so... Oh, here we are. We're going to wrap up a couple of things here. I thought that it would be interesting to, I think I saw this on Twitter, and this is from April 16th, 2020. And it says, this is the National Compost. And the Post Media, the Compost Media, is the largest recipient of government bailouts in Canada. So the Wuhan Disease Lab is the focus of suspicion and conspiracy theories about COVID-19's origins. A plausible, if unproven, theory is that the coronavirus had natural origins, but leaked accidentally from the Wuhan Institute of Virology Lab. And of course, I don't have to get into all of this gaslighting that they're putting out there, but I'll just read a couple of paragraphs really quick. The basic facts are admittedly ripe for conspiracy theory. China's only high security infectious disease laboratory is located in Wuhan, the city where the coronavirus began and the COVID-19 pandemic first emerged. And the lab is famous for its sometimes controversial research on such pathogens. Most of the online speculation evoking chilling scenarios of biological weapon and the like lacks credible evidence, and some has been directly refuted by science. But a new report says that the U.S. diplomats voiced serious concerns about the safety of the lab in 2018 and has added circumstantial backing to a more plausible, if unproven, theory that the virus had natural origins but leaked accidentally from the Wuhan Institute of Virology Lab. It was a very convenient accident given the state of the Hong Kong protests at that particular time. So it's much more likely the germ emerged naturally from the environment, said Dr. David Kelvin, a Dalhousie University virologist who works with researchers elsewhere in China. But he said the laboratory leak, it's possible it could happen. Now, they're going to go on here, I think, with a bunch of, what if and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, we're at a state right now where, we know that like the COVID-19 genome has been sequenced, and it does contain a sequence of that was patented by Moderna. I want to say 2017, 2018. They said there's like a 1 in 10 billion chances of it actually arising naturally. And we know that Fauci has been discovered to have suppressed that kind of information when he was being approached by, others high up in the CDC, and they were saying like there's no chance that this fits with the evolutionary model. That was what they were saying right off the bat. But then he basically whipped them all into toeing the line and publishing that article in the Lancet that just scapegoated and gaslit everybody into going along with the official narrative that this was naturally evolved. Anyway, that basically left the Lancet, which is one of the most credible medical journals in the world. Their reputation is in shambles now, having had all of these highly esteemed experts come out and write this declaration that we're all crazy to think that there's any real concerns to be validated around the Wuhan lab leak theory. So anyway, this is all kind of coming back now, and Fauci is going to be back in front of the Congress very shortly. We showed some speeches from Jim Jordan and the like, who really smell the blood in the water right now. They have the emails where they can show it was all a big cover up, and Fauci was just covering his ass because he's the one who gave the grants and approved this research over there in Wuhan, and he skirted the law. He changed the words to try to make it sound like it was something other than it wasn't. And so, he's the one who's kind of going to hang, figuratively speaking, for all this stuff. Of course, he got all of his minions that are dependent on him for their grant money, for his approvals, to all collude together and create this narrative in the Lancet that was entirely political and contradicted even what they were saying amongst themselves behind the scenes in the email chain. So there you go. And here's a little something with a bunch of Chinese writing there. I didn't really bother to translate it. This looks like video coming out of China. I'm always kind of going like, there's still the great firewall of China to consider. Like, is this something that they're allowing us to see for the purpose of manipulating us? Like, I suspect a lot of those early COVID videos were of people dropping dead in the streets and so on and so forth. Like, maybe that's the kind of thing that does happen in a really populated society like this, that you can maybe grab a few snippets of here and there. But it seemed to me like perhaps they were trying to make it seem more scary than it actually was, and they were shady as hell, of course, coming out of the Chinese. But this, I don't see any advantage conferred to the Chinese Communist Party in allowing this kind of a video to make its way out. So this does seem to me like a sign that China is opening. And if you're just listening on Spotify or something, then what we're looking at here is there's a massive crowd that's surrounding a vehicle. It's a police vehicle. And it looks like the police are opening the back of the cruiser to try to tell somebody to get in there. And they're not getting in. And the police seem to be backing off for fear of being mobbed by this angry mob of people who are sick and tired of Xi Jinping's cruelty. Okay, so I'll just kind of let the sound go here for you guys. So he opened the back of the cruiser there, the back door, and I think what he's doing is he's like threatening to put somebody in the back, or he's asking somebody to get in the back. It looks like the back seat is empty, so that's kind of what I'm gathering from the body language. And this guy over here, like, he just hit the cop car and he threw something at the cops. He's not even wearing a mask. I think his lady friend is kind of stepping in here to say, smarten up. Like, they have facial recognition software around here and you need to be thinking about that. But I see a lot of people. Look at this. Like, these people are not wearing their masks. This is something that's different, I think, because previously in the streets, most of the time, we would see them running around with their masks to hopefully to evade any kind of identification. And they are risking their lives here when you're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. This kind of dissent is not well tolerated by Xi Jinping. I read somewhere actually that his favorite form of torture is this, the Chinese, they're really twisted with this stuff. Chinese water torture from back in the day, and what he likes to do is he likes to pin people down by their femurs and lift their feet, bend their knees the wrong way, backwards, slowly. I remember reading that somewhere one time, but anyway, yeah, he seems like he's quite megalomaniacal, and these people are taking huge risks with their lives and livelihoods to be out in the streets, standing up to this tyranny. So, and that's a good sign. Okay. And what you see is it's young people, right? And this is something I'm always trying to highlight here. I'll just go back for a second. Is it's young people that are out here. Okay, these are millennials over there in China, and like I'm often saying, the leaders of the revolution are going to be Gen Xers, and that's kind of what we're watching for here in a fourth turning. Xi Jinping is a boomer. And so the Gen Xers over there in China would also be the kids in Tiananmen Square. So if there's any kind of cultural memory as to what actually happened with that massacre, as opposed to what the CCP made it out to be, then it resides with that generation. So, okay. And here we have Aussie 17. He's tweeting Dr. John Campbell. He says, boom, Dr. John Campbell officially makes the U-turn. I know he has been skeptical for some time about the vax, but this is his official statement to stop the shots. Like I said, gradually, then suddenly. They can't risk the being on the wrong side when the hard data drops. Now, I don't know, man. I thought they were on the wrong side from day one. Just the data that I was seeing, taking a skeptical eye to this whole thing. It seemed to me like while the data was limited, in real life, we need to make judgment calls based on incomplete data. And I was looking at that incomplete data and saying, I don't see any support for the kind of the hard actions they're taking on any of this. But, I think that there were other agendas driving this, profit motivations and political careers to consider. So, here we go with Dr. Jan Campbell. And he's, if you're not familiar with him, this guy is one of the guys who's been awakened, I guess. He's out of the matrix now. He started off very pro-vaccine, and I think he's really kind of come around. I haven't followed him in the whole time, but he seems quite good. So I'll let him do his little 4-minute video here for you guys.
Welcome to this talk. My name is John Campbell. I'm a semi-retired clinical nurse lecturer, academic, researcher, author of numerous articles and 2 textbooks. My specialisms are human physiology and pathophysiology as applied to clinical practice. I've also produced many educational videos which are used extensively around the world. In my view, the UK health authorities should pause the current COVID-19 mass vaccine rollout programme due to the risks associated with the vaccines. As time has passed since the early days of 2020, the number of patients hospitalised with COVID-19 infections has continued to decline since its peak in previous waves. This is clearly seen in data published by the UK government and the Office for National Statistics. In addition, the proportion of patients in hospital with COVID-19 is now greater than the patients admitted to hospital for COVID-19. This is true for general hospital admissions as well as intensive care admissions. In other words, most COVID-positive patients admitted to hospital now are incidental and were not admitted purely for complications of COVID. As a result of mass infections during the various waves of the pandemic, especially the huge numbers of people infected with the Omicron variant, most people have developed levels of natural immunity to the virus. This natural infection also generates mucosal compartment immunity in the respiratory tract, which the injected vaccines do not. While prior infection does not always prevent symptomatic disease, it does provide levels of protection against severe disease and hospitalization. This means the overall risk from COVID-19 infection with SARS coronavirus 2 is significantly less than it was when the vaccination programs were first instigated. However, the risks associated with ongoing vaccinations are probably the same as they were in the early stages of the pandemic and mass vaccination programs. If I am correct in this evaluation, this means that the risk of COVID-19 infection has gone down, while the risk of vaccination remains the same. This fundamentally alters the risk-benefit analysis of this current mass vaccination programme. I therefore consider that the UK government authorities should pause the current mass vaccination programme until a full population scale risk-benefit analysis is carried out and published for free and open peer review. I further call on the UK authorities to review the intramuscular injection technique used in the delivery of the mRNA vaccines. Currently, after insertion of the needle, the syringe is not aspirated to ensure the tip of the needle is not in a blood vessel. This leaves open the possibility of inadvertent intravascular administration, resulting in systemic spread of the mRNA vaccine particles in seconds. This would mean that mRNA vaccine particles would circulate in relatively undiluted form through vessels of the major organs of the body. This video is specific to current mRNA vaccines. I continue to promote the massive benefit of other forms of vaccination in the UK and around the world. Thank you for watching.
Okay, so yeah, this that's an interesting element that he mentioned there, that the tip of the needle is not aspirated, so they don't know if they're putting it into the muscle or into a blood vessel. And that was always the problem I understood from early on, was that this was supposed to be intramuscular. It was supposed to stay in the shoulder, but the mRNA went everywhere. So when that mRNA makes its way into the heart, you're gonna find, it's going to tend to accumulate in areas where there's a lot of blood flow. So naturally, the heart is where you're going to see a lot of issues with the mRNA and the spike protein accumulating. Also, the tissue that the tissue that produces the spike protein, when you start getting those boosters, the body goes after that tissue because it recognizes that it's the source of the spike protein that it's trying to eliminate. And then that causes permanent damage. It damages that tissue. And if it's the heart tissue, then you're going to end up with some serious problems. And of course, that really applies to anywhere where there's heavy blood flow. So it could be multiple organ failure. It could be the liver, the kidneys, eyes, brain, anything. And so anyway, this is really good to see. We're seeing follow the evidence wherever it leads. So it's nice to see that we have some credentialed people, establishment people, boomers who are waking up to this and speaking out. And we need to see more of that. We need to see more people kind of that have done their full career, that are at the peak of their fields, the tops of the fields, coming out like this. But what we're seeing at this moment in our history is that there's just so much corruption across the board, with the conflicts of interest and the financial incentives that we're just not seeing too many of them come forward like this. But let's try and highlight those Obi-Wan figures when we can here. Okay, here's Blacklocks reporter minding Ottawa's business. So Blacklocks, they're a really good independent media outlet. They sell subscriptions. They don't take any bailout. I think I'm probably going to buy a subscription here really soon. I just kind of want to support these guys because they do amazing work, and I never really get to read the best work out there. I kind of have to rely on other people who have accounts to report on that stuff for me. So it might be a good investment for podcast purposes. But here we have Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. There have been multiple suspected gang-related shootings in Vancouver, the Greater Toronto Area, and the Greater Montreal area in 2021. The unique nature of the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed vulnerabilities in the public and private sector, with fraud, money laundering, and corruption being important enabling activities of OCGs. So that would be organized crime groups. FinTrack has observed that COVID-19 has led to an increase in specific categories of fraud, which criminals have adapted from existing schemes. The CSIC deemed Canadians at risk of COVID-19 related fraud and noted the following between March 6, 2020 and January 31st, 2022. Reports of COVID-19 fraud, 30,827. Victims of COVID-19 fraud, 28,291. Loss of COVID-19 fraud, 7.86 million. It is suspected that OCGs so those are organized crime groups, are also involved in areas of the public sector. According to CSIC, the principal motivating factors for corruption in the sector are familial connections, romantic relationships, and monetary benefits. Those are pretty standard tactics, I think, by crime groups and also by communists, is to leverage familial connections for, blackmail purposes, romantic relationships. Often, honeypots are a thing. There was the spy who shagged me there. Who was that down in the United States? The guy who was literally shagging his he was a politician. He was literally shagging his admin assistant, who was CCP operative. So they do this kind of thing. They send in their operatives like that to get close to people in key positions in government or politicians and what have you. So familial connections, romantic relationships, and monetary benefits, bribes, obviously, right? In C6 OCG threat ranking relating to corruption, published in 2020, 26 OCGs were found to have influence access within Canadian public sector agencies and departments. Internationally, it is estimated that the potential losses to corruption could be as high as 1.2 trillion Canadian per year. In 2020, over 2,000 organized crime groups were identified to be operating in Canada. Of these, 506 organized crime groups have been assessed by CSIC, and 14 of those assessed have been categorized as national high-level threats. Wonderful. 14 of those 506 organized crime groups have been categorized as national high-level threats. So here we have gangs reach in public sector. Organized crime is suspected to be operating in the public sector. It says access to information briefing note at the Department of Public Safety. The memo did not identify any federal office by name, but said there was, quote, corruption in the sector, close quote. The rest of it is for Blacklocks members only. I think that was another one that Tom put in the sit rep there this morning. So I'll give a shout out to Tom Quiggin again for bringing that to my attention anyway. Okay, I wanted to kind of circle back onto something. I want to Jen Psaki into something. God, I can't believe I've been saying that. That's become such a cultural meme now. Because nobody said circle back before. Jim Jordan, I was talking about this, I think it was yesterday. They're having a big fight for the Speaker of the House, especially the House Republicans. They can't really seem to get any momentum behind the anointed candidate. Jim Jordan is really kind of the up-and-comer here, and I was talking about here he is born 1964. So by most definitions, this could be considered a boomer. 61 is the last birth year according to Strauss-Howe generational theory, and according to Pew, it is 64, I think. It is actually 64, 65. So he's kind of right on the line there. And then we have Kevin McCarthy. He's kind of the establishment guy, and he's actually 1965. So these guys are kind of, it's hard to say that one of them is a boomer and the other one is a Gen Xer. So I think what we're kind of dealing with here is the first wave Gen Xers, which I've talked about before. I say that the first wave Gen Xers are kind of split between the establishment and the revolutionaries. And we need to kind of distinguish between which ones are the establishment demagogues, because the fourth turning actually says beware the Gen Xer demagogue. So these are the ones that we have to watch out for. And so what I'm finding is the one who parrots the establishment narrative, the one the one who parrots the establishment narrative. He's the one who is the demagogue. Trudeau is a very good example of that. Like, he doesn't have any original thoughts in his head. He's not leading anything. He's not really making any decisions. He's simply demagoguing. He's simply reading talking points. He's simply manipulating people by their emotions. And it's pretty obvious to me that the one talking in his ear is the boomer male, or the boomer hegemony. The boomer hegemony is the man behind the curtain. Trudeau is just the Wizard of Oz. And so what we're trying to figure out is Jim Jeffries one of these marionettes on a Kabuki theater stage? Or is it, oh, sorry, I went the wrong way with that. Is it Kevin McCarthy? And I think it's better to think of these guys as elder Gen Xers, because that's kind of where the split is going to be. Once you get down into the second wave Gen Xers, the more punk rock, more Seattle sound in particular, you know, the guys who had to start their own record companies instead of, because the boomers wouldn't let them make their recordings through their, or let them make their albums through their recording companies. But anyway, so these guys are an interesting split, and I'm trying to thread the needle with this one here. And what I find is, oh, sorry, that's Bobert. I'm going to go back again. What I find is really the way to distinguish is we have Jordan is a close ally of former President Donald Trump. During Trump's presidency, Jordan sought to discredit investigations into Russian interference in 2016. Now, this is Wikipedia, okay? So it is the progressive perspective that you're getting right here. So he stayed loyal, basically. I pointed this out. He refused to cooperate United States House of Select Committee in connection with the January 6, 2021 storming of the U.S. Capitol by election fraud protesters, which subpoenaed him on May 12, 2022. So he's got a lot of courage there, I think, standing up to these powerful people engaged in lawfare, trying to subpoena him and stuff like that. But as I've said before, like, the January 6th was a false flag. That's what they were trying to do to us in Ottawa, but they framed those people up. They were peaceful people who walked into the Capitol building, that is a public space where the doors were held open for them by Capitol security, only for them to turn around and arrest them on trespassing charges. And some of them are still waiting to get in front of the judge. So this guy stuck to his guns. He is like, no, January 6th, this whole sham inquiry is not going to fly, and I'm not going to buckle. And on the other side, we have McCarthy condemn the January 6th United States Capitol attack in the immediate aftermath, blaming Trump for the riot and saying the 2020 election was legitimate. He would later walk back these and reconcile with Trump. Okay, so he walked that back. So he's a bit of a flip-flopper. He's I'm questioning the backbone on this guy. He seems like he's more of a political opportunist, and I can see anybody can make a mistake here and there, but this looks to me like a political opportunist who will change his position depending on which way the winds are blowing. And this guy's been consistent throughout. And people are always scapegoating Trump and saying that Trump is doing all this stuff. Trump is just the manifestation of a kind of an unrest that's been brewing for a very long time with the direction things are going in the West, in our politics. And this is consistent with the Strauss-Howe generational theory again, where the autumn in the great year, which is called a saeculum, is the unraveling, and that started with 9/11. The unraveling. Well, no, not 9/11. I think that's the crisis moment of it. But at any rate, the unraveling would comprise, I think, the 90s and the 2000s up till 2008, and then the crisis kicks in 2008. So really, like, a lot of this unrest has been mounting for my entire adult life, basically. As soon as we came out of high school, we got GST and collapsing economies and all kinds of, like, student debt and high interest and high tuition, and price of housing was, quadrupled and stuff like that. So things were already going in the wrong direction then. And we see, I think, Trump is really just kind of the culmination of a lot of that. He was the boomer who broke ranks with the establishment and said, the game is rigged. They're all in it together. I know, because I've been doing the same thing my whole life. And now I want to put my skills to work for you guys. That's kind of what I saw. And yeah, he's a con man. I don't really like the way that he talks sometimes when he says things like, believe me. I'm like, okay, as soon as you lost me already, you lost me as soon as you say, believe me. But, you know, I tend to judge people on by what they do. And he did a lot, even according to Neil Howe from Strauss-Howe generational theory, he actually stalled the fourth turning. And that's not something you're supposed to be able to do. There's no stopping a fourth turning. But apparently the damage, at least looking at the market trends, which is what Neil Howe is all about. He's an economist first and foremost. And he says that, yeah, like the Great Depression, the second Great Depression basically hasn't hit us yet because of the Trump presidency. But enough about that. So we're talking about these House speakers here, and Lauren Boebert was somebody who came out for not McCarthy, but Jim Jordan. And we saw her in one of the articles, I think, that I presented yesterday, where she was being referred to by the compost media there as a right-wing lunatic or something to that effect. But anyway, she's a young person who sees things going in the wrong way. Michael Knowles is a Gen Xer, and this is I think she might be millennial. But anyway, this is what we're seeing. I think it's like I'm always saying, like the pendulum, it swings from left to right. Everybody talks about that, but I remember, like, for my entire adult life, I was like, well, the pendulum swings because of the force of gravity being applied on it. So it's an incomplete analogy without the force of gravity being identified. Well, it turns out it's demography, as in changing demographics. And what we see is a lot of people in the generations that are coming up now, they're saying, no, this is not going in the right direction. And the rest of us want to be able to have wealth and opportunity as well. So here's Lauren Boebert, the right-wing lunatic who's backing Jim Jeffries, explaining why this split has emerged and why it is that Kevin McCarthy started out as all but the presumptive speaker, losing by only 4 votes, and now he's losing by over 20. So here she is explaining what's really happening.
Well, let's begin at where it started. This started in the summer. We wanted to handle this privately and have a solution before January 3rd. These negotiations began in the summer, and they were dismissed because Kevin McCarthy thought he was going to have this massive red wave, and our votes did not matter. When he saw that the $300 million that he raised did not produce the red wave that he promised, he realized quickly he's going to need our votes. And so some concessions were put into play. It was very difficult to get them into play. It was difficult to get them approved with our rules process, the way Washington, D.C. operates and functions. We want to fundamentally change this town. It is broken. It is less popular with the American people than cockroaches. So we have to get something right here, and we cannot go along with the status quo. Well, on January 2nd, 2 of my fellow colleagues and myself, Matt Gaetz, Scott Perry, we walked into Leader McCarthy's office after whipping votes all day long and handed him 218 votes. We said, here it is. Let's seal the deal. Here's some common sense issues that you can put forward, some promises that you can make. Single member motion to vacate. So there is accountability on the third in line to the presidency of the United States. You cannot demand more responsibility and follow Nancy Pelosi's precedents of less accountability. So this is our check and balance on the speaker. And that was a priority for me personally, certainly, and for many others. But then things like bring the Texas.
So this is the split. The establishment, the boomer establishment tends to rule us instead of governing us. And so they like all that control. And I found that was the way it was in the military. I was always looking at them like they're looking at me like I'm a troublemaker for asking them, hey, when are you guys going to start following your orders? But they expect all of us to follow theirs. So it's a self-serving style of leadership. that I see across the board, and this is kind of what the problem is, and what the younger generations are trying to address. They're saying there's not enough check on this power. These people are unaccountable, and we're trying to build checks into the system on these powers in order to hold them accountable. And that's really the word of the day, folks. Pee Wee Herman's word of the day is accountability. That's what seems to be lacking throughout this entire process, right?
Border plan to the floor for a vote. Bring a term limits bill to the floor for a vote. Any member who wants to reduce spending in an amendment will make that amendment in order so we can bring it to the floor and have a vote. Earmarks, bring them to the floor individually for a vote. This is spending money that we do not have. So let's at least have a vote on it instead of packing it into a bill where we have no option to either swallow the whole thing or say no way. These are things that we presented to him. He solicited a list from us of committee assignments. All members provide committee assignment requests. We know where our talents and skills are best utilized, and we provided that list. Kevin McCarthy made a great argument saying, listen, the people in this group only want 2 committees. I need you spread out. I want you to have more influence. And we agreed with that. And we said, this is a time constraint on many of the members. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure, but we're willing to take that sacrifice and have these committee assignments that bear more pressure. And so we provided that to him. And then January 2nd, when all of that was laid on the table, Kevin McCarthy laughed us out of the room, said that it was a selfish wish list, and would not take the deal. Well, now here we stand, Michael. I no longer have those 218 votes to provide to Kevin McCarthy. So it doesn't matter if I go to the floor today and vote for Kevin McCarthy, because there are now more than ever votes that he does not have to get to that speakership. This is very important to know. He walked out of that meeting and lied about what we requested. Trust is absolutely broken if there was any to begin with. And this is a huge.
And there's another word of the day for you folks, is trust. It's been, and she's right. Like, how can we trust these institutions? I don't know if I can ever trust the medical establishment to give me another ejection. And I've heard people express concerns about, being subjected to an unconsensual injection while they're going in for surgeries and stuff like this. And it's just like, this is going to be a lasting fallout, I think, that we're going to see in terms of the breach of the public trust throughout this crisis.
Huge problem. We want unity in the Republican Party, and I believe now is the time to start seriously considering consensus candidates who will unify the Republican Party so we can get to work for the American people.
This is really important content.
And I like that she's saying consensus candidates, because that's really kind of that's what leadership is supposed to be. You're supposed to be building consensus, right? And there's a lot of, conflict management for leaders courses that you can do. I've done them, and it's really, the training is all about identifying the common cause, the common ground that we have between the parties, and then exploring that first. And what ends up happening, at least in my overwhelming experience, is that once you approach it that way, what you will find is that common ground tends to grow. You tend to find more areas for collaboration, and you should never expect that everybody's going to agree with you on everything, not even as a leader. And it's not about barking orders. It's about gaining support. It's about inspiring people to, it's about motivating people to do, like definitionally, leadership is about motivating people to do whatever the leader's agenda is. But you can't be rigid in the application of an agenda. You need to be flexible, because you're dealing with people, and people are complex creatures that have all of their own kind of motivating factors. And so a lot of what a leader should be doing is figuring out what makes these people tick, what motivates them, and how to appeal to their intellect and to their goals, as adults and thinking people, as opposed to autonomous drones who just follow orders.
Context, I think, because what you're saying is, over the summer, Leader McCarthy just didn't think he needed you guys because there were
Correct.
supposed to be more Republicans in the House. And so he would be able to win the speakership without having your votes along. Because of what happened, that turned out to be a bad bet. And when you make bad bets, you got to pay the price for those bad bets. And you bring up this other point, which is trust. And I think this is really important because a lot of this debate has focused on how on the issues, Kevin McCarthy is relatively pretty good. You know, we come from a world of John Boehners, so I guess Kevin McCarthy is more conservative than John Boehner. But what you're saying is, no, it's really about trust. When we're talking about leadership elections, we need to be able to trust the leader. And what you're saying is, you don't think that Leader McCarthy has proven himself trustworthy.
Correct. And that's why we wanted the tools implemented to where maybe we don't need to trust him because the individual member is empowered enough to get the job done and is not ruled by a dictator as speaker. This is not a kingdom that.
And again, I just kind of want to reinforce what she's saying here. That's the way a good government is set up. A good liberal democracy is set up to be as unreliant on or independent of having to invoke any trust in the public. Like the areas for which we require you to trust us should be as small as possible because we have a system of accountability that's been set up to disperse the decision-making power amongst as many parties as possible. And you know, in the United States, like they did set up their constitution like that. They did make it to force consensus building. That was the way it was supposed to work. That's why the government shuts down and stops paying people when they don't pass a budget down there, because that is where the political pressure comes from on the elected representatives to force them back to the table, to continue building that common ground until they get to a consensus so everybody gets paid. And I'd love to see a measure like that put in place in Canada, where our parliamentarians stop receiving their salaries if they don't pass a budget. I think we would have had a very different experience over the last several years if we had a measure like that in place. And that's a kind of measure of accountability that we really need to build into our system. So I think Lauren Boebert and her cohorts are very much on the right track here.
That we live in. We don't anoint a king. I believe that this is how our founding fathers intended this process to work. Our vote is there to be debated, not just rubber stamped and cast to the biggest fundraiser. But you cannot have good faith negotiations where trust is absent. And so that's why motion to vacate was so important to me, because that is the check and balance on this position. If you break trust, if you don't do what you promised, well, buddy, you're out of there. And he has already shown he's not willing to do that. I still have not seen a public announcement of a single member motion to vacate. He's lying to the American
Lauren, for those who
people, saying
don't,
that he
for
gave
those
us
listening
that.
who don't
Sure,
know what that is, what is a motion to vacate?
A motion to vacate gives us the opportunity to remove the speaker and have another vote for speaker if necessary. This is something that does not get used, but it's available. This is something Thomas Jefferson wrote and has been in effect for nearly 2 centuries. And Nancy Pelosi was the first speaker in history to modify that. She removed that individual empowerment from the member and said, you no longer have a say in this. I get to rule how I want, and you don't have a check. You don't have a balance. Kevin McCarthy wanted to leave that as Nancy Pelosi had it. There were concessions. He got down to 50, got down to 20, got down to 5. No, Thomas Jefferson wrote it as one member. Any one member can bring that motion to vacate the chair forward. And that is our accountability. This is something that was my red line. And I've only heard from a staff member who chased us out of the GOP conference and begged us to vote for Kevin McCarthy. We'll give you a single member motion to vacate. And I said, that's adorable. Where's Kevin saying it?
So
okay, I'm going to leave it there. I think that's spot on. Yeah. I like the way she says that's adorable because sending a staffer out like that to do your job for you as a leader, to build that consensus, like the expectation, I think, that underlies that kind of an action is, that he's expecting fealty. He thinks like once these people have expressed their support, that is a permanent state of affairs, and now he's the anointed one. And so she's using a lot of verbiage here that I find to be very effective in highlighting the kind of woeful narcissism, I think, that really is at the root of a lot of our leadership issues right now, because this is a leadership crisis. It wasn't a health crisis to start with. It might be now. It probably is now, but that's not the same thing. That is a result of the initial leadership crisis that is represented in the fourth turning. So I think that's probably the last one I got for you guys today. Yep, we're back to Carl Jung again, and one more time, this is every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. And again, idealism is the characteristic that marks the profit generational archetype, currently represented as the boomer generation. That's an important thing to watch out for, guys. I think that idealism in a leader is deadly. Essentially, it's probably not the kind of guy that you want leading you in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, I think that's what we had in a lot of cases, with the, it's just their culture with respect to the widespread boy rape that takes place in Afghanistan. It's a cultural phenomenon known as the bot shop Aussie, which means girl boys. So, that's the kind of, exploitation, the egregious kind of exploitation that can result in a kind of glossing over of the nitty gritty details of the situation for your own, emotional comfort, as opposed to maybe just hardening up and engaging with those nitty gritty details in a little bit of cynicism. And I think that what you will see is once we have more cynical leaders in place, you'll see things really kind of start to turn. And Lauren Boebert, I think, is a pretty good example of the kind of cynicism that we need to see in our leaders, where they're looking at these programs and policies and human nature as challenges that need to be managed, as opposed to these tools for them to usher in the utopia and get their way with everything all the time. So I'll throw to a couple of comments here before I sign off here, guys. And Sue was saying, love for you to have a talk with Matt Ehret, Canadian Patriot Press. I'm not very familiar with their content. I think I've heard Canadian Patriot Press mentioned out there, but I'm not really tracking what they're doing. Ultimately, I'm willing to talk to anybody. If anybody wants to maybe message me or something and set that up, by all means, I'm looking for as much help as I can get, because this is a one-man show essentially. and the guys are always reaching out to me with ideas, pitching these things to come on the program. And I'm putting myself out there as a facilitator, as somebody who's kind of been willing to come on here and do this every day and drag these conversations out of people. But I'm kind of counting on my veteran brothers, especially brothers and sisters, pardon me, ladies, to do a bit of the legwork here for me, some of the heavy lifting. So I appreciate it. Ken saying, great show. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate you tuning in all the time. And Sue has let me know that I'm sure you can connect with Matt. I don't even know him. I don't know where to start. So feel free to give me a vector on that. And pardon me if I seem to be a little bit aversive in this regard, but it's a time management protocol for myself, because I could really spend a lot of time putting these shows together. And if I did everything that I wanted to with regard to the show, then the rest of my life would probably fall apart. So Ken asked an interesting question here too. He says, wonder if the vax has metals, and if they set off an EMP, will it melt, boil the blood, and people just drop without a single shot being shot? I think I'm just going to say I don't know about this one. I'm not. I haven't really given this a tremendous amount of thought. My initial impression is that there are metals in other vaccines as well, like mercury, And there are good reasons for including these kinds of chemicals in some of the vaccines. It may be for the purpose of attenuating vaccine or attenuating a live virus, that kind of thing, that they're injecting into you for the purpose of peaking the immune response. But of course, they suppress the harshness of the virus with other chemicals and things like that make it a little bit more inert. So it's not harmful or as harmful, but it does give you the immune response that you're looking for. So there's already some of those metals going around in those vaccines. There always has been. So I'm not entirely sure that that's something new and probably not as viable as it sounds with the EMP thing. Like an EMP is just that. It's an electromagnetic pulse. And when you're talking about electromagnetic energy, you're basically talking about, anything radio frequency, microwave, or visible light for that matter. Those are all just different frequencies on the same electromagnetic spectrum. The human eye is able to detect a very narrow band of frequency on that electromagnetic spectrum, and things like insects are able to see a hell of a lot more colors than we're able to see. But it's all kind of the same stuff. It's out there in the atmosphere, with SATCOM, satellite signals, microwave towers. Microwave towers are employed a lot in the cell phone network, things like that. So this stuff is out there, and it's not clear to me that there's any kind of excitation, like electrical excitation, that is impacting any of those metals in the blood. And when it comes to an EMP, we're talking about an electromagnetic excitation that's much greater than the ambient level of noise that we experience right now, but it's also much shorter because it's a pulse. And so then there's a question of duty cycle when we're dealing with pulsed energy. It's a low duty cycle, so it's like a radar pulse. It's like high energy but low duty cycle. You don't want to stand in front of the radar antenna because you'll get an unacceptable level of radiation there. But when you're just kind of driving up to the site, you should be fine because of that low duty cycle. So it's not transmitting constantly. It's just like a very quick burst of energy. And then that has implications for things like the actual like real power that's being applied to those particles. So no, I don't think that's really viable, even in the case of a large EMP. Like you'd be talking about like basically vaporizing people in fractions of a second, like infinitesimal fractions of a second. So it sounds like it's pretty far-fetched, but it's an interesting idea to consider. I'll say that. So if there's any evidence out there to support the viability of this option as a means of warfare, then I'd be happy to look at the data and chase that down, because it sounds interesting, but just my first impression is that's probably not viable. I think we have two different heads of a hydra here when we're looking at the bioweapon that is the vaccine. It meets that definition, and the potential for a nuke going off in the upper atmosphere and taking down the North American power grid. So I think those are two different prongs that can be applied here. But no, I'm not so sure that that's a viable option to have those two prongs meet with the metal in the injection receiving excitation from the EMP that results in the electrocution or the boiling of the human body. So no, I'm not so sure that that's something to worry about, but we have enough to worry about already with those two things to consider. So interesting question. That's fun to think about anyway. Not really fun. It's worrying, but yeah, I like to kind of work these things out. So Sue McGilvery is asking about 5G. Again, this is these are kind of low level microwave signals. Not really something I think to be concerned about. The big concern with 5G is the fact that China is beating us in it with Huawei, and it's next generation. It's next generation infrastructure, essentially. So they're making their way into the third world with the state of the art internet infrastructure. And once the thing about these new technologies is once they come into place, the systems become dependent on them, and older systems tend to atrophy. Case in point being, the railroad here in my home of Cape Breton, like it's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. It's just dilapidating. The roads are there, and a lot of it is being done by trucking now. And the amount of demand really in the area is not sufficient to support a train industry, because we have the roads to support modern trucking, and also people have cars, so they can get around without the train, and so that infrastructure tends to atrophy. And so that's kind of the strategic importance of 5G. It is a strategic asset. We can't allow the Chinese to have 5G in Canada, because they're just going to use it to subvert us. We have to start beating them in this battle space internationally, globally, because it's 1984 out there. They're trying to pull the colonies into their orbit, and if Africa goes the way of China with the Belt and Road Initiative, then it is. Then that's going to have ramifications down the road several generations from now. Due to their influence, due to those populous countries coming into the Chinese orbit, and that could mean some very different outcomes from the people there, especially when it comes to mining in the Congo, for example. We see there are artisanal miners there. They're not supposed to be artisanal. We're sort of just waking up to that now. That means people digging with their hands. So it's not supposed to be like that, and they're not supposed to be using child labor, but they are. But anyway, this is something to consider. The 5G is a strategic asset, but no, it's not. It's not a weapon on the human body. I don't think that the evidence there is there to support that. And I got a couple more here that say, awesome show, Jeff, thanks. And Sue saying, ha ha ha, you will cheese bugs like that, ha ha. Okay, so yeah, I know I'm not going after that one. But okay, I got an email address to follow up on here. So thanks, Sue. I'm not going to put that in the stream, but I'll reach out to those guys and see if we can get something together here. So anyway, and a couple more about the 5G. Here we go. Magda Havas, Trent University, discussing the 5G experiment, November 2019. Okay, that sounds like something that's got some veracity to it. I could look into that. But this is a bit of an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence if it is to be believed. The power levels and stuff like that are just not really there, as far as I'm aware, but I'll look into it when I have time. Okay, guys. So it's been really great here today to round the week out. I'm well under my 2-hour mark that I've been keeping with all week, so I think that's a sign of progress on my part. I should be delivering this stuff to you, I think, a little bit more condensed, so it'll tighten up as we go along. And thanks to everybody who stayed with me again today. It's pretty clear to me that we're being throttled at this point, but I was always suspicious. Anyway, it's a war, folks. It's not just any individual battle. So we're in it for the long haul around here. And for now, we'll say stay frosty and stay safe out there.